Hello, and welcome back to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. For this upload, we will be reading Leviticus chapter 3. And if his oblation be a sacrifice of peace offering, if he offer it of the herd, whether it be a male or female, he shall offer it without blemish before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of his offering, and kill it at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall sprinkle the blood upon the altar round about. And he shall offer of the sacrifice of the peace offering an offering made by fire unto the Lord, the fat that covereth the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is on them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver, with the kidneys, it shall he take away. And Aaron's sons shall burn it on the altar upon the burnt sacrifice, which is upon the wood that is on the fire. It is an offering made by fire, of a sweet savour unto the Lord. And if his offering for a sacrifice of peace offering unto the Lord be of the flock, male or female, he shall offer it without blemish. If he offer a lamb for his offering, then shall he offer it before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of the offering, and kill it before the tabernacle of the congregation. And Aaron's sons shall sprinkle the blood thereof round about upon the altar. And he shall offer of the sacrifice of the peace offering an offering made by fire unto the Lord, the fat thereof, and the whole rump, it shall he take off hard by the backbone, and the fat that covereth the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is upon them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver. With the kidneys, it shall he take away. And the priest shall burn it upon the altar. It is the food of the offering made by fire unto the Lord. And if his offering be a goat, then he shall offer it before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of it, and kill it before the tabernacle of the congregation. And the sons of Aaron shall sprinkle the blood thereof upon the altar round about. And he shall offer thereof his offering, even an offering made by fire unto the Lord, the fat that covereth the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is upon them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver, with the kidneys, it shall he take away. And the priest shall burn them upon the altar. It is the food of the offering made by fire, for a sweet savour. All the fat is the Lord's. It shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout all your dwellings, that ye eat neither fat nor blood. Summarizing Leviticus chapter 3. The first thing you'll notice if you decide to read a different version, I'm always reading from the King James. The first reason, I have a physical copy of the King James Version, and I think that is important. Secondly, it's out of tradition, and it's a preference, but my preference is probably linked to the tradition of using the King James Version. So, if you read these English translations, the English Standard, the New International Version, the New American Standard, the Christian Standard Bible, the New Living Translation, these will all say, okay, not all of them, but some of them will say fellowship sacrifice instead of peace offering. So sort of like in chapter 2, it was a meat/grain offering. Well, for chapter 3, we have a fellowship/peace offering. That's the first thing. This chapter details God's instructions for making a peace/fellowship offering. The first requirement: the animal presented needs to be an unblemished flock or herd animal that is male or female, and this is in verse 1 and verse 6. So flock and herd, those terms both refer to a group of animals and can be used interchangeably. It's just that flock tends to be used with birds and sheep, but it would be technically correct to say a herd of sheep, a herd of birds, but you see, a herd of bird, the bird is the word. Okay, that's usually when people are referring to a large group of birds, they will say a flock of birds, like a flock of seagulls. So in verse 7, a lamb is specifically mentioned. This also falls into a flock animal. And verse 12, a goat is specifically mentioned, which I think the term most of the time is a herd of goats. The second requirement, lay hand on the animal, kill it at the tabernacle entrance, and Aaron's sons will sprinkle blood around the altar. And that's in verse 2, verse 8, and verse 13. The third requirement, a peace offering to the Lord will include removing the fat covering the organs and the fat filling the body, remove the 2 kidneys, and in the King James Version, remove the caul above the liver. So this is a different, in every other translation it says lobe of liver, but here in the King James Version it says caul, and I will go into detail a little bit about this later. But the caul fat is the term that you would use for this body part now is called the caul fat, and it is a connective tissue membrane that covers the organs in some animals, and it lines the stomach. If an animal is a lamb, and this was in verse 9, this is an additional requirement, to remove the entire rump. And it says here, take off hard at backbone. It's different in some of these other translations. It'll say remove the entire fat tail and the fat surrounding the entrails. This one says internal organs, but that was a little bit of a difference in translation. In verse 5 and verse 16, when the herd animal and the goat, the instructions were given for the herd animal and the instruction were given for the goat, the phrasing used in those verses were a sweet savor to the Lord, or a pleasing aroma to the Lord, an aroma pleasing to the Lord, sweet savor. But that was used for the herd animal and the goat instructions. And pleasing aroma. And then in verse 11 and verse 16, the phrasing, it is the food of the offering made by fire. That phrase was used in verse 11 and verse 16. So we're on verse 16 now. Let me see, food and offering, soothing aroma, food of offering, sweet savor, right? And also show that in verse 11, food offering, food offering. I just thought that was interesting that in verse 11 and verse 16, mentioning a flock animal, lamb, and goat, the phrase food of the offering made by fire was used. Lastly, verse 17 ends with a dietary restriction yet again. From Genesis chapter 2 up until now, God has given a lot of directions about what can be eaten. Now, this is the second time not eating blood, or the instruction to not eat blood, was mentioned here. The first time was in Genesis chapter 9, verse 4. Do we have it here? Yes, Genesis chapter 9, verse 4. Do not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. So God even calls the blood the life. And just want to mention again, another dietary restriction. It's important what can be, what you eat. And the second chapter of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 2, God told Adam that they would die if they ate the wrong thing, which is the fruit of good and evil. But he told them they would die. You can literally die from what you eat. It affected their mental health because they were naked the whole time. And after they ate this, now their mentality changed. And now they realize they're naked and it's a problem. So just want to mention that again. Genesis chapter 9, verse 4, this is when when the flood ended and they got off the boat. And if you notice, when God was telling Adam and Eve all that they were able to eat, he said, you can eat from any of the trees. He didn't give human permission to eat animals until after the flood in Genesis chapter 9. I'm sure they ate it anyway, but God gave them permission in Genesis chapter 9. So, some of the highlights. Leviticus chapter 1 is a burnt offering, or instructions for how to properly present a burnt offering to God. Genesis, did I say Genesis? Leviticus chapter 1 is a burnt offering, the instructions for burnt offering. Leviticus chapter 2, those are the instructions for a meat/grain offering. And Leviticus chapter 3 are the instructions for a peace/fellowship offering. Great. And then we look at verse 4, verse 9, and verse 15. I'm sorry, verse 4, verse 10, and verse 15. We see the term long lobe, but in the King James Version, the one that I read, the call. And what made me want to look this up is because I have no idea what call meant. Well, I know what it means now, but I had no idea what it meant when I read this. And when I looked at this compared to these other translations, when we see this phrasing, long lobe of liver, this is different. Or this, to me, I read this differently than reading call above the liver. Because a part of the liver means that it's a part attached to the specific organ. But this phrasing, call above the liver, this, I read this as this is a different part of the body. This isn't part of the liver the same way lobe of liver. So I read those two things differently, and it made me want to do a little bit more research. So caul is mentioned in addition to the other fat as an item that needs to be removed and burned as a peace offering. The correct term for this word now, if you wanted to get the right, if you wanted to Google it and get the right image, you would call this caul fat, not just caul anymore. For some reason, that's just the way it is now. And the caul is a little bit different than the lobe. So because I didn't know what caul meant, I looked up the word caul. And it says the large fatty omentum covering the intestines. Even though this is correct, because I don't know what omentum means, this didn't help me to understand. And the second meaning is the inner fetal membrane. So for me, reading this did not help me understand what this verse was saying. And in my head, I was still thinking that this is a part of the liver. So I decided to look up the term omentum, a fold of peritoneum connecting or supporting abdominal structures, such as the stomach and liver. So this has something to do with the liver, but again, I have no idea what this is. I'm still thinking this is part of the liver. So I decided to look up the word membrane. Maybe that would help me understand more what this is. And a thin, soft, pliable sheet or layer doesn't help offer any more information. So I want to understand what God wanted removed from the animal when they were making sacrifices. So because I don't really understand what caul means, because these other translations are supposed to be comparable, and the rest of them say long lobe of liver, every single English translation, well, I'll look up what the term lobe means. And it doesn't offer any more information, a curved or rounded projection or division. So I decided to look up lobe of liver sheep. And when I typed up lobe of liver the first time, it brought up it brought up human, the human liver. And I thought, well, okay, so there's four parts of the lobe. And it didn't seem right that God would want us to, not us, because this was given to Moses, but it doesn't seem like God would want Moses or the Israelites to cut up part of an organ. That doesn't seem consistent with the other information given. And again, that's the difference between of the liver and above the liver. The lobe, if it's divided grossly into 4 parts, that would mean part of the liver would have to be cut. I hope this is clear enough. But if the phrasing lobe of liver was correct, that means God would have wanted them to remove the liver, cut one part of the liver, and burn it, and leave the other parts there. I mean, that doesn't make sense. And then why here would the King James Version say above the liver? If it's above the liver, then that's not the liver. So I need to look up something else. And when I typed in call above the liver, and I kept looking and looking until I got to the Wikipedia article. It brought up this image, which is one of the images in this video, but it's called the call fat. And this image, when I looked this up, it has this word omentum, which we looked up earlier. That makes sense. And it says a fold, connecting or supportive abdominal structures. And then it also has the term membrane for call. And this makes sense. So this is the structure that God wanted removed. It's above the liver. What I was just trying to illustrate here is that some of the reason why, if you want to understand the Bible, well, not even going to say you, the reason why I want to always read this, have a dictionary open, and use multiple translations is because things like this occur all the time with ancient texts. A phrasing will be used, and even though this is something that isn't something that pertains to us right now, because we're not doing these type of sacrifices anymore, I'm not sure why, because I haven't got to that part of the Bible yet. But I hope I've illustrated clearly how information can be manipulated by just having a different phrasing. The difference in the phrasing here is God wanted them to cut up a part of the liver. There's 4 lobes of the liver. So using the term lobe in the English translation gives you it's a different meaning than call above the liver. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for watching, and the next upload will be Leviticus chapter 4.